The room fell silent before the first sentence had even been completed. A private decree carrying Queen Elizabeth's signature had been opened by the trustees, and its instruction was unmistakable. Archie was to be blocked from a protected royal inheritance arrangement, while Princess Charlotte was named as its principal beneficiary. One child had been pushed outside the boundary, another had been placed directly at the center of the late Queen's final design. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Harry heard the ruling during a call and said nothing. The silence frightened the advisor more than anger would have, because the prince understood what had happened. His son had been shut out of benefits. Archie had never been old enough to accept or reject. The private family trust, a protected arrangement holding heirlooms, residences, ceremonial privileges, and family assets, was separate from the crown. The institution passed from sovereign to sovereign. Yet exclusion still carried a brutal message about belonging. William felt the opposite pull. Relief came first because the decree ended uncertainty, but relief quickly turned into guilt. Charlotte had been named principal beneficiary, the child placed first to receive and protect the trust's contents. The future king knew she had gained more than valuables. She had inherited a burden created by another child's removal, and he feared she would one day ask why her security required Archie's name to disappear. The trustees then disclosed the clause that changed the room. Elizabeth had not written a preference that could be softened later. She imposed a direct restriction, preventing Charles, William, Harry, or any family member from transferring Charlotte's position to another descendant. Beside the formal wording, the late monarch added one handwritten sentence: "The chosen child must remain within the daily life and duty of the crown." Her concern was not affection, it was continuity. Charles reached the final page and stopped. He removed his glasses, placed them beside the decree, and tightened one hand around the paper. Camilla watched without speaking, then moved closer. The king understood that his mother had built the decision to survive even his authority, and the queen consort knew any challenge could expose a fracture. Then the lead trustee placed a second sealed attachment on the table. He explained that it contained Elizabeth's reason for blocking Archie, drawn from a private confrontation years earlier. Harry's silence, William's guilt, and Charles's shock were no longer the end of the story. They were only the beginning. The decree had revealed who Elizabeth chose, but the sealed attachment would reveal exactly whom she had stopped trusting. Neither Archie nor Charlotte had chosen the families, countries, or controversies surrounding their names. Yet the decree had placed them inside a conflict shaped long before either child could understand it. Charlotte became the symbol of royal continuity, while Archie became the symbol of separation. Behind the legal language were two young lives, and adults who now had to confront what the late Queen's decision appeared to say about belonging, loyalty, and inheritance. Charlotte had grown up close to the working royal household, the group of family members who carry out official duties on behalf of the monarch. William and Catherine had brought her into ceremonies tied to the crown's future, teaching her that privilege came with discipline. Archie's life had unfolded differently. Harry and Meghan were raising him outside Britain, far from the daily rituals, expectations, and public service that had shaped Elizabeth's idea of royal responsibility. Harry could not separate the ruling from his son. He told Meghan during a private recorded conversation that Archie had been forced to carry consequences created by adults, choices made before the boy could understand the word monarchy. She listened as he called the exclusion a rejection, not a technical adjustment. The father's anger came from one fear, that his child would someday believe distance meant he had been loved less. Catherine felt a different pain. She feared Charlotte would eventually discover that her protected position had been secured through another child's removal. The mother understood the late Queen had intended responsibility, not victory, yet intention could not erase guilt. After bedtime, she entered her daughter's room, noticed a ceremonial photograph resting on the desk, and quietly turned it face down before leaving. William then received a documented account from the lead trustee. Charlotte had not been chosen simply because of her place in the line of succession, the official order determining who could inherit the throne. Elizabeth had seen in the young princess a steadiness that reminded her of Princess Anne. Quiet attention, loyalty under pressure, and an instinct to support without demanding the center. The trustee disclosed one more detail from the sealed record. Elizabeth revised the decree only after watching both branches of the family during a tense period of separation. The date matched a Windsor gathering when Harry, Meghan, William, and Catherine had all been present. That afternoon ended with the monarch closing a folder and declaring that the arrangement could no longer remain unchanged. To understand why one name was protected and another removed, the family would have to return to the afternoon when Elizabeth decided distance had become something far more permanent. The decision had not begun with money, jewels, or titles. It began during a private Windsor meeting when Elizabeth asked a simple question and received an answer that changed everything. The gathering was meant to settle how future generations would remain connected to royal life. Instead, it exposed a division the Queen could no longer ignore. Those present would later remember the same detail. The monarch stopped taking notes and slowly closed the folder in front of her. Elizabeth had originally designed a wider family arrangement for several great-grandchildren. The private trust, a protected structure holding selected possessions for named relatives, would preserve shared access to letters, heirlooms, and objects tied to the monarchy's history. But access came with responsibility. The children benefiting from it were expected to remain connected to family ceremonies, private gatherings, and the long duty of protecting items meant to serve future sovereigns. Harry entered the meeting, determined to draw a final boundary. He told the Queen that Archie's upbringing would remain permanently independent from royal obligations, and that no future trustee should expect ceremonial participation from him. The prince believed he was protecting his son from pressure. Elizabeth heard something else, a demand that the monarchy preserve privileges while accepting that the responsibilities attached to them might never be carried. The room tightened around that difference. Harry accused his grandmother of turning family legacy into a test of obedience, and his frustration showed when he pushed his chair backward. The Queen did not raise her voice. She accepted his right to choose another life, yet she could not ignore what that choice meant for possessions created to support royal duty rather than private status. Harry left before the discussion ended. Elizabeth then turned to Princess Anne and asked whether a child living outside royal duty could fairly control objects intended to serve future sovereigns. Anne answered through a documented account later preserved by the trustees. Inheritance without stewardship would eventually become possession without purpose. The monarch listened, reopened the folder, and made one decision that could not be undone. That evening, Elizabeth summoned the trustees, the independent custodians required to follow her written instructions, and ordered a revision. Charlotte's name was added, because she would remain close enough to protect what was being passed down. Archie's original page was removed, folded once, and placed beneath the sealed attachment. Years later, Harry would stare at that detail and reach a darker conclusion. The choice may have belonged to Elizabeth, but he was convinced William had helped shape it, and that suspicion demanded a confrontation. The revision had been Elizabeth's decision, but Harry was now convinced that someone still living had guided her hand. There were no aides, no cameras, and no carefully prepared statements when the brothers finally faced each other. Harry entered believing William had helped remove Archie from their grandmother's protection. William entered knowing that any defense of the decree would sound like a defense of exclusion. Between them lay years of resentment, one sealed document, and the name of a child who had never been allowed to speak for himself. Harry had rejected every offer to let lawyers or palace officials explain the decision. He wanted his brother, not another carefully worded message. The trustees were independent custodians, appointed to follow Elizabeth's written wishes, but their authority did not calm him. It made the exclusion feel colder. William agreed to meet because he understood that hiding behind procedure would only confirm the belief that the family valued protection over honesty. The door closed, and Harry attacked first. He accused William of securing Charlotte's future at Archie's expense, then asked whether the prince had known about the revision before their grandmother died. His words were controlled, but the anger beneath them was not. William denied influencing the Queen and said he would never ask for one child to be elevated through another child's humiliation. William then admitted something he had never discussed. Elizabeth had privately questioned him about Charlotte's temperament, her sense of duty, and the way she supported George without competing with him. The line of succession, the order deciding who may inherit the throne, placed the young princess behind her brother, but the monarch had seemed more interested in character than rank. She never mentioned the decree. She never said Archie would be removed. Harry listened, then reached inside his folder. He produced a copied note preserved in a documented trustee record and placed it on the table. The page showed that William's household had supplied personal observations about Charlotte months before Elizabeth revised the arrangement. He pushed it across the polished surface and asked how information could have traveled without the future king knowing. William read the first line and stopped. He recognized the handwriting of a former palace secretary who had served his household and communicated directly with the trustees. The discovery wounded him because it made his denial appear incomplete, even if it remained true. Harry watched his face change and understood that the note had shocked him. William finally said the information had been sent without his authorization. The admission did not clear either brother. It shifted the danger toward advisors who had moved between households, carrying private judgments into decisions no family member could later reverse. The brothers' anger had finally reached the surface, but the copied note suggested that the real power had been operating quietly between the palace rooms. Charles could command a palace, lead a nation through ceremony, and speak with the authority of the crown, but he could not erase his mother's private signature. The trustees held a different kind of power, silent, legal, and deliberately protected from royal emotion. When the king asked whether the arrangement could be reconsidered, the answer was delivered without hesitation. Elizabeth had anticipated pressure, and she had written the decree to survive it. Charles listened as the lead trustee explained the boundary Elizabeth had created. The trustees were independent custodians, meaning they were legally required to protect the private arrangement and follow its written instructions exactly. They did not answer to the sovereign, the heir, a spouse, or any royal household. That separation mattered because the late queen had feared future arguments might turn her final wishes into another family negotiation. The king felt trapped between two duties. Defending his mother's signature preserved her authority, but allowing the decree to stand without protest made Archie's exclusion appear permanent and personal. Charles knew Harry would not see legal structure. He would see his son's name blocked while Charlotte's remained protected, and that wound could deepen a division the monarch had already failed to heal. Camilla urged caution when the trustees paused. She told Charles quietly that challenging them in public would not rescue Archie. It would expose the king's limits, invite humiliation, and leave Harry watching his father lose a battle fought in his child's name. The queen consort understood that power sometimes looked strongest when it refused to struggle against a door that could not be opened. The lead trustee then revealed the clause Elizabeth had designed for exactly this moment. A non-interference clause, a rule preventing later relatives from changing the decision, stated that no sovereign, heir, spouse, or parent could replace Charlotte with another beneficiary. A second provision allowed Archie to receive personal letters, gifts, and family keepsakes, but permanently barred him from controlling assets connected to active royal duty. Charles made one final request. He asked for the decree to remain with him overnight so he could read every line alone. The trustee closed the folder, kept one hand firmly across its cover, and replied that even the original document could not leave their custody. Camilla watched the king absorb the refusal, and he understood that his mother had trusted the system to resist even him. Then came the final blow. The restriction would take effect immediately, and Archie's provisional name had to be removed from the private family register before morning. Until that moment, the decree had been an argument about intention. Now it was about to become a visible act of exclusion. The first consequence arrived without ceremony. No bells rang, no statement was read. A registrar opened the private family ledger, drew a careful line through Archie's provisional entry, and wrote Charlotte's name beside the trust designation. It took less than a minute. Yet for Harry, that movement of ink carried the weight of a door closing across generations. What had been private language was now an official family reality. Harry received the amended page through a secure message and stared at the crossed-out entry until the screen dimmed. For him, that silence felt heavier than any public statement ever could. The protected beneficiary register, the official list naming who may receive and safeguard assets under the private trust, now carried only Charlotte's name. Archie remained a member of the family and could still receive personal letters, gifts, and keepsakes, but the privileges controlled by Elizabeth's decree had been removed. The distinction offered no comfort. Harry saw his son reduced to a correction in a ledger shaped by adults, distance, and duty. Meghan watched him enlarge the image, then told him that Archie must never grow up believing he was worth less than his cousins. She understood the system had drawn a line, but she refused to let that line enter their child's heart. A private inventory deepened the loss. The trust held more than jewelry. It protected Elizabeth's letters, childhood objects, ceremonial pieces, and access to a small residence where the Queen had once spent quiet family weekends. These items mattered because they carried memory as well as value, and because whoever controlled them would help decide how the late monarch's private story survived. Charlotte had not received unrestricted ownership. The decree required her, when old enough, to accept a written duty of stewardship, the responsibility to preserve the collection rather than treat it as personal property. Her apparent victory came with a burden. She would inherit access, but also the obligation to protect objects connected to a family division she had never created. Harry printed the amended register and held it with both hands. When Archie approached, he folded the page once, placed it inside a drawer, and forced his expression into a smile. Meghan saw the change immediately. She said nothing, but remained beside him until their son left the room. That night, William called without advisors. He did not offer an appeal or another explanation from the trustees. He offered something the decree had never demanded: a personal promise about Archie's place inside the family. The institution had delivered its decision, but the next move would come not from a trustee, a monarch, or a legal clause. It would come from one brother speaking to another. William did not call to defend the trustees. He did not ask Harry to accept the decree or forgive the people who had enforced it. Instead, he spoke as an uncle. For the first time since the document became public within the family, the argument moved away from assets and returned to the children themselves. What followed could not reverse Elizabeth's command, but it could determine whether her decision destroyed the relationship between those left behind. William contacted his brother without aides, lawyers, or palace officials listening. The absence mattered because every earlier exchange had passed through people trained to protect the institution. This call offered no shield. He acknowledged that Charlotte's legal position was fixed under the decree, but argued that family belonging did not have to be defined by the same document. Harry answered with restraint rather than anger. He told William that promises were difficult to trust when Archie's name had already been crossed out by people serving the same family. The prince did not accuse his brother of writing the order, but he refused to pretend the pain had become less real simply because the explanation sounded careful. William admitted something he had not said aloud before. He feared Charlotte might one day resent inheriting an obligation born from division rather than celebration. The future king explained that stewardship, the duty to preserve something for those who come after, could become a burden if it began with guilt. He promised that when his daughter was old enough, she would hear the full story. She would never be allowed to believe Archie had been replaced because he was loved less. Harry then revealed, through their private recorded conversation, that Elizabeth had once sent Archie a separate personal letter. The late Queen had written without titles, conditions, or references to duty. That detail changed the silence between the brothers. It suggested she had separated institutional responsibility from emotional love, even if the decree had failed to protect the child from feeling rejected. William waited, then spoke with simplicity. "The document can decide custody, but it will not decide whether I am his uncle." Harry did not forgive him. He did not agree that the wound could be repaired. But he stayed on the line, and for both men, that choice carried more weight than any polished statement. Charles later learned of the exchange through a documented family account. The king decided the palace had to separate Archie's family status from the trust ruling before the world delivered a harsher verdict. The brothers had found a narrow path away from permanent rupture, but outside the palace walls, the decree was about to become a global judgment. By sunrise, the private decree was no longer private. The story spread across broadcasts, front pages, and crowds gathered outside royal gates. Some saw Elizabeth's decision as a defense of duty. Others saw a child being punished for his parents' departure. The monarchy had faced arguments over titles, money, and loyalty before. But this time, the image at the center of the storm was not a king or prince. It was a crossed-out child's name. Harry watched the first broadcast in silence. The presenter framed the dispute as a clash between hereditary privilege, family responsibility, and the cost of living outside the working monarchy. That term meant the group of royals who perform official duties for the sovereign. The father heard policy. He felt rejection. Every careful phrase seemed to protect the institution while leaving Archie exposed. Charles approved a formal clarification, stating that Archie remained a loved member of the family, even though Elizabeth's private trust was governed by binding instructions that could not be rewritten. The king believed it was the strongest defense he could offer without breaking his mother's decree. Harry disagreed. He told Meghan during a recorded conversation that the statement guarded the crown's reputation more fiercely than it guarded their son's dignity. Meghan answered that love spoken behind palace walls meant little unless the public message protected Archie clearly. Harry agreed, and both understood that public silence could harden into history forever itself. Catherine felt the pressure from another direction. Headlines began calling Charlotte the winner, a word that made the mother recoil. The princess had not won anything. She had inherited stewardship, the duty to preserve possessions for those who came after, and that burden now carried another child's pain. William understood her fear and warned advisors not to celebrate the ruling. Commentators then uncovered documented examples showing that Elizabeth had used similar conditions in earlier private arrangements. Her choices had often depended on closeness to duty, not private affection. The trustees deepened that distinction by releasing one final sentence from the decree. Charlotte had been chosen to preserve, never to triumph. Outside Windsor Castle, a crowd gathered beneath a newspaper board, carrying the headline, "One name crossed out, another given the Queen's last trust." One woman stepped forward and placed two small white flowers beneath it. One was labeled Archie. The other was labeled Charlotte. For a moment, public anger softened into shared sadness. That image reached Charles, Harry, William, and Catherine before noon. It forced them toward one final family response, because silence could no longer protect either child. Elizabeth's words had divided the world, but the family's final decision would determine what those words were allowed to mean. The decree was never withdrawn. Archie's name was not restored to the trust, and Charlotte's appointment was not weakened. Yet the final outcome was not the triumph of one child over another. It was the recognition that Elizabeth had separated two things the family kept confusing: love and stewardship. One could be shared without limit. The other demanded presence, responsibility, and sacrifice. Only when the family accepted that distinction did the conflict finally begin to lose its power. Charles confirmed that the decree would remain enforced. Overturning Elizabeth's instructions would betray his mother's wishes and weaken every private royal trust protected from pressure. Such a trust is a legal arrangement holding assets for named beneficiaries. The king understood that changing one decree for emotional reasons could make every future promise vulnerable. Charlotte remained the future custodian, but her role was no longer described as a reward. William and Catherine agreed she would be taught the truth when old enough. Stewardship meant preserving family history for others, not claiming victory. The prince knew his daughter must honor every branch of the family, including Archie. Harry did not celebrate. He accepted, however, that his son's emotional place within the family could not depend on protected property. During a private recorded conversation with Meghan, he admitted the distinction still hurt, but refused to let the decree define Archie's worth. She answered that their child must inherit love without resentment. Elizabeth's separate letter changed the final meeting. The trustees placed it under family protection, confirming through a documented account that it contained no title, condition, or command. The Queen had written only as a grandmother, assuring Archie that distance had never erased affection. Her words separated personal love from institutional duty. Harry placed a copy of the letter beside the decree. William moved the pages together and said they must never again be discussed, as though only one represented Elizabeth. The trustees confirmed Charlotte's first responsibility would be preserving that letter beside the other family materials. She would guard Archie's connection, not replace him. Archie had been blocked from an institutionally protected inheritance, but he had not been erased. Charlotte had been chosen because Elizabeth believed she would remain close enough to carry the burden of preservation. The monarchy survived by accepting one truth: duty could be restricted, but love could not. And with the decree preserved, the letter protected, and both children freed from the adults' battle, Elizabeth's final decision reached its true conclusion. Charlotte would guard the legacy, while Archie would remain part of the family it belonged to. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.